Well, thank you very, very much. You may wonder why it is, if we're talking about prohibition, why am I coming dressed as a historical firefighter? And I think a historical firefighter would say, yeah. I mean, I think, Ray and I and others are the Sound Shore Historical Fire Company that used to be the Larchmont Historical Fire Company, but now we've joined the Mamaroneck Historical Society. We've moved our assets over here, and we're starting and we're expanding our service area. And so it's wonderful. And one of our commitments was that we would do some programs for the Historical Society, part of being a good citizen in the new group. And so this is the first of them, and we have more to come. But I would also say that the fire service is a wonderful lens to look into a community. And so pretty much any topic, if you look at the fire service perspective about it, you will learn something. Now, that won't dominate in this talk, but you will see some perspectives from the fire service that I'll mention. So this is about prohibition in Mamaroneck and Larchmont. Now, I'm going to start with the fire service right away. Why would we be interested in Charles McKnight Lesser? Charles McKnight Lesser, Colonel Lesser, graduated from West Point in 1861 and fought at the Battle of Bull Run. He lived at the Manor House in Larchmont in the 1890s. And he was the publisher of Bonfort's Wine and Spirits. This was the big newsletter for the liquor industry nationally. They advertised everything, the latest prices, there were reviews of things. And so really, Mamaroneck, because when he was in this, it was the time when the town was the town, and Larchmont didn't even exist, but then it did. But in any case, he was an opinion leader about the liquor industry, and he lived in our community. So what did he have to say? This was his opinion. You would think that he would be against prohibition, okay? Because after all, he is a purveyor of all of liquor. So he says, about saloons, they are a stench in the nostrils of society and a disgrace to the wine and spirit trade. How then can we defend the average saloon? We answer, we don't defend it, we condemn it. This confession is a fair definition of the saloon. It is a moral leper and social reprobate in any community. It is gross, obscene, vulgar, and profane. It is the home of gamblers and other criminals and the resort of prostitutes. Its decorations are immodest, indecent, and suggestive. With these facts before us, there is no middle ground, no room for sentimentalism, no basis for compromise. It is a place of unadulterated evil. It cannot be made respectable. It must go. But basically, his position was that was about beer. It wasn't about the finer spirits of wine and whiskey and so forth. It was just the beer that was served to the lower classes. So he actually didn't expect that there was going to be much of an effect. Now why am I showing this? He also was he was the leader of a Civil War company that consisted of a lot of companies recruited from volunteer fire departments in Westchester and the surrounding areas. and they were called fire zouaves, and that's the uniform he's wearing, that's the uniform I'm wearing, and that is the uniform that we march in the historical fire company. It's a Civil War volunteer firefighter uniform for parades. And he was the leader of the organization of the veterans into the 70s, 80s, and 90s after the Civil War, and was responsible for the hose company's uniform in Larchmont, which was based on this. And so our liquor purveyor was also the inspiration for a lot of things in our fire department. Now, back to Prohibition. Let's have a chronology. 1917, the Lever Act banned production of distilled spirits as a war measure, just banned production. 1919, you got the approval as the 18th Amendment. 1919, you also then got the Volstead Act, which was the federal law implementing the amendment. So 1920, Prohibition goes into effect. Now, up there, the Women's Club of Mamaroneck was established in 1925. I don't know what the stories are of establishing the Women's Club, but it was established in the high point of Prohibition. Anyway, 29, the Jones Act increased penalties. And then 33, another law legalized beer. And in 1933, it was repealed by the 21st Amendment. So that's the time frame of Prohibition nationally, but we are interested here in what happened in Mamaroneck. Now, when Prohibition was enacted, there was a belief that this was going to improve society. And Billy Sunday's speech, "The reign of tears is over. The slums will soon be a memory. We'll turn our prisons into factories and our jails into storehouses and corn cribs. Men will walk upright now. Women will smile, and children will laugh. Hell will be forever for rent." I mean, so this was the optimism of what it would mean if we removed the pernicious effects of alcoholism from our society. So, I mean, I know, for example, that like in the fire departments of the time, the people that were hired to drive the rigs, the turnover of the rig drivers was because they would show up drunk. I mean, this was just a severe problem in terms of the productivity of our society. And there was a well-intentioned thought that this was going to help. Now, this is a map of the United States. This was states adopting the Prohibition Amendment. And so these ones are the ones in white are the ones that didn't want to do it. And so those were the ones that got a particular amount of attention from the federal enforcement agents, because they were the ones that lacked the self-discipline to vote for this on themselves. And so there was a great deal of attention to these ends of states of iniquity. Now, this is an editorial from the New York Times, and basically it says that the Volstead Act, insisting that beverages that contain as much as 0.5% of alcohol shall be regarded as, in fact, as little as, intoxicating, Congress has simply yielded to the extremists of the anti-saloon league. In other words, the Prohibition constitutional amendment didn't actually say a lot about the precise amount, but the Volstead federal law did. And the federal law set a surprisingly low amount of alcohol as what you couldn't have. In the face of fact and experience and common sense, it is ordained that what is non-intoxicating shall be intoxicating. It is made unlawful the harmless habits of millions in the use of beers and light wines. It has stretched the amendment beyond the point where public sentiment will sustain it. Moreover, it has manufactured many sorts of technical violations which men of sober lives regard as offensive and pettily tyrannical. So the New York Times, of course, in the middle of a state that didn't vote for this anyway, was laying out why they thought this was fundamentally flawed, that in setting the bar so low, that they were going to lose public support. So it says is stirring a public sentiment that will make the enforcement it provides, and perhaps even proper enforcement, more difficult and finally impossible. And so they're basically saying that this is not going to work. Guess what? Now, here are the rules, and I'll mark out a couple of them here. You may drink intoxicating liquor in your home or in the home of a friend when you are a bona fide guest. Even during Prohibition, you could drink the booze. You may buy intoxicating liquor on a bona fide medical prescription of a doctor. A pint can be bought every 10 days. You may manufacture, sell, or transport liquor for non-beverage or sacramental purposes, provided you obtain a government permit. And so there were these stories of Rabbi O'Leary in Brooklyn, who had set up a special synagogue and basically you would get your sacramental wine from Rabbi O'Leary. Now, this is in 1919, the mayor was called the president. So the Mamaroneck president Hunter says, patent medicines of high alcoholic content are always available. Probably these panaceas will now be sold in great quantity. In other words, the mayor basically assumed, he says, Mamaroneck liquor dealers did a land office business in bottled firewater laid in before the drought which began Tuesday by prudent people who feared a future illness with no spirits in the house. However, they need not have been apprehensive. And, they're pointing out that you could get your liquor from the pharmacy. Now, here are ways that alcoholic beverages can be legally acquired. As I said, you can make it in your home, you can do a bona fide medical prescription, but most important is the one down in the bottom. Home brew of beer or wine, up to 200 gallons per year per family. Now think of that, 200 gallons per year. That's 4 gallons per week. If mom and pa would drink each 1 gallon, then you could serve the other 2 gallons on the children's breakfast cereal. I mean, how would you consume 200 gallons per year? But anyway, that was the rule, and I haven't brought any this time, but the Historical Fire Company has a wine that we have a label. Our label is fog nozzle. And we have it, we put it right on the bottle, and we have a wine that is a Prohibition Concord, which is basically brewed exactly in the manner that you would have produced wine in your basement in Mamaroneck during Prohibition. And it also tastes like it's like vinegar with a lot of sugar in it. Except that it's got a good kick if you do it right. Now, these are advertisements from the pharmacy, basically describing the various kinds of. It says wines and liquors for medicinal purposes only. And then it says there's New England rum and California port and sherry and champagne and pure grain alcohol. But this is only for and specials, very old thistle bloom Scotch whiskey. It's exactly what you need for medicinal purposes only. And this is a liquor prescription form. Your doctor signs it, and then you can take it over to the pharmacy and you can pick up your liquor. Now, this is a map that this is the run line was the maritime limit. You could have all sorts of ships with booze out here. And then, like this is Long Island, when you came in, then that would be you could be apprehended. So you could go out and celebrate out on ships. Out here, you just take a boat out, go out in the morning and be brought back at night. And you could drink all you wanted on the ship. And also the ship could in fact come in, but if you were gonna smuggle liquor in to New York, though you didn't want to bring it into Long Island, because Long Island has a choke point. It's not a, it's between, if you're trying to get to New York with your liquor, you gotta get across the bridge or whatever. Anyway, I'll get back to that in a minute, but I gotta read you this one. This is the minister in Larchmont, his sermon about prohibition. And he says, we're all within speaking distance of flagrant violations of law and order. It's reported you can buy liquor in Larchmont on both sides of the railroad. Now, you know what that means. I mean, the manor side of the railroad, but then there's also the other part that's on the other side of the railroad where the uncouth, ungodly live. But on both sides, you could the liquor. Because citizens buy it and the trade continues to exist, disrespect for law, let alone ordinary decency of life, will reap the whirlwind of moral collapse in the generation to come. And it certainly did. Now, this is a raid in Larchmont. I'll have some Mamaroneck raids too. This was the Chatsworth House. It was an inn. Anna Schiffman and her proprietor and the bartender were arrested. There was liquor worth $10,000. Officer Keresy, who later became the chief in Larchmont, assisted. And so you had the local police participating in these kinds of raids. Now, in 1921, because of the lack of enforcement, the state decided that they would make the state bone dry in 60 days. And so he was gonna, he basically said that, my men are going about this business in a systematic way which cannot fail but bring the result we are aiming at. We are going to get the illegally possessed liquor. We're gonna get the men who sell it and the men who buy it and drink it. Each county will be under constant surveillance by my men from the fact that they will pay a business visit to at least one community in each of 50 counties every week from now on. Bootlegging, moonshining, blind tigers, and all traffic in liquor in the territory covered by the state police will be entirely wiped out. Now, here is a newspaper report of a raid in Mamaroneck. Harry Rashi, proprietor of a drinking place on West Coast Road, and August Foss, his bartender, were arrested Monday afternoon by the state police. They were arraigned and they pleaded not guilty, were placed under $1,000 bond each to wait the action of the grand jury. The evidence against Rashi was secured by Alexander Rooney of the state police, who went into the saloon garbed as a working man. First, he got a pail of water for his thirsty flivver, meaning that the motor needed a little bit of water in the radiator. Then a soft drink for himself, and finally, after lingering around for a time, it was understood that Romney asked for something a little stronger, with the result stated. So that's what happened. Now here's another instance. The agents dressed as tennis players and succeeded in Now, this is an interesting file perspective. This is in the 1922 Daybell book of the Larchmont Fire Department. And what it says, what is officially recorded is return to Colonial Market, 1 case of beer with 2 dry bottles of ginger ale for Poe's Company to get credit for same. Notified Captain D. Shaw of the same. In other words, they were recording the fact that they would go and buy liquor in the back of the Colonial Market in the official documents of the fire department upstairs from the police department. So, this was some. Now, here the plot thickens. This is in the Larchmont Times. Prohibition agents think high flyers will do their future hip toting in this county. Roadside inns to be closely watched from now on within the next 4 weeks. The activities of a large population of the 250 enforcement agents attached to the New York State Prohibition Department will be transferred to Westchester County. Plans now in secret preparation at headquarters here indicate that the federal authorities believe that section will see the future nightlife of gay Manhattanites. Their principal campaign, however, will not be directed against conditions in the larger cities and towns, but against the numerous roadhouses lining Pelham Parkway, the Boston and Albany Post Roads, and other thoroughfares leading from the city. That is to say that they are going to be zooming in on Mamaroneck and Larchmont on the Post Road. And they did. Seven big raids and dozens of scattering visits have been made there. The most successful occurred last November when Izzy Einstein and Mo Smith who you will meet, descended upon 34 hotels and restaurants with 105 agents. 60 arrests were made and 2 truckloads of liquor confiscated. Anyway, there's the Izzy and Mo are our lead agents, and you will meet them in a moment. But first, this is a cartoon that appeared in the Larchmont Times, and we'll drill into some of what it depicts because it captures the tensions between the police department and a public that doesn't want to comply with the laws that the police department is expected to enforce, and journalists who make fun of it. This is when the bootlegger special comes to 10. And so Chatsworth Inn is now, which was later called the Larchmont Lodge. But it anyway, they're coming basically down the post road where there's the village hall is on the corner. That's where this is taking place, and that's where the police are. And so this is taking place in Larchmont. Now, Larchmont Police Chief Bill Hines spreads nails on the post road. Sergeant Gus Ansys fires on the bootleggers from behind a streetlight. So it's war. The bootleggers are coming. 4 of Larchmont's finest are deployed on the roofs of stores, including Officer Gene Marshall. One resident is apparently firing a water pistol from an upper window. It's all out. Several more police officers, Ken Ireland, Ollie Cochran, Frank Hodson, John Bartlett, and Otto Vierscher, respond from a side street. Vierscher is preparing to fire a small cannon. Oh, incidentally, I believe. Whoops. Let's go back down here. I believe that this is engine 1. This is engine 1, Larchmont's 1922 American LaFrance pumper, which is our rig that we have today. We believe that engine 1 is making an appearance in this cartoon. Bill Keresy, the first Keresy who eventually became police chief in Larchmont, is depicted as attempting to lasso the bootleggers, but his rope hits a local resident, Art Greenwood. Officer Frank Hogglestein appears perilously in the line of fire. Jim O'Laughlin is depicted firing backwards and hitting Jacob Zvirin, who was the proprietor of Zvirin's stationery shop. That was a shop that was there at. For the record, this didn't really happen. Desperate thirsts require desperate measures as one Larchmonter hangs out of a window in an attempt to get a fair share of some of the bootleggers' products. Other Larchmonters are not fully cooperative with the police, as one lady is shown dropping a flower pot on the head of one of our officers. This captures the attitude of the public and the problems that the police face. I wonder what their response to this was. Larchmont's residents, like many people during Prohibition, had a mixed view of Prohibition. Van Zell, that's the cartoonist, shows Larchmont is taking a greater interest in getting a share of the bootleggers' brew than in fighting organized crime. Local residents are scooping, vacuuming, pumping, and just plain licking up the boots that spilled on the street. I mean, this is the Boston Post Road. Now, here's a hummocks incident. The select neighborhood of the hummocks was invaded early Thanksgiving Day morning by what might appear as an organized band of bootleggers. The idea of landing boats filled with booze at a private estate was carefully planned, and if the Weaver Street police were not different from the police of some neighboring communities, according to allegations, Thursday's morning haul would have never been known as far as the public is concerned. Officers Relling and Effingham of the Weaver Street Police are to be commended for performing their duty. They were completely outnumbered when they arrested 20 some members of the ring. Liquor to the amount of $100,000 was confiscated, but as a matter of fact, the real leaders, whoever they were not caught. The result of the arrests is that one man, a driver of one of the trucks loaded with liquor, was held for the federal authorities. One man. The other men were promptly discharged as they could not be held, according to Judge Schaefer's ruling, as they were arrested on private property. Apparently, you couldn't arrest people on private property. I don't know why, but the nipping in the bud of the gang should serve as a warning that the police of this community can be called upon to do their duty. I guess, but it wasn't very successful. I mean, they apprehended more than 20 people and succeeded in getting one into court. The home of Edward F. Albee, the theatrical man, at the Hummocks was broken into on Monday night of last week, and several $1,000s worth of wine and other liquors was stolen. It is thought that the loot was taken away by boat. The Mamaroneck Crown Police are working on the case. Now, I told you about Izzy and Mo. Izzy and Mo. Izzy and Mo raided the Roth House at 180 Main Street in New Rochelle. There was liquor worth $25,000, transported from a small inlet. When Nathan Williams, a waiter, learned the identity of the agents, he fainted, and it was necessary to administer a drink of his own liquor to revive him. Now that address is right there, and you can see the water from Five Islands comes right up to there. And the lesson here is that you're not going to bring in your booze to Long Island. You're going to go around and you're going to bring it in Long Island Sound and get as close to New York as you can at places where the water is close enough to the post road that you can quickly offload your stuff, and it can go on into wherever it is that you want to deliver it. So if you think of the places like that, Mamaroneck is like that. The post roads going up, and it's easy to be able to drop something off and deliver it. Now, Izzy and Mo, our prohibition agents, were the subject of a Jackie Gleason and Art Carney movie. You can watch the movie on. I mean, you do it. You go on YouTube and ask for the Izzy and Mo, and you can see the movie, and it's all about our prohibition agents and everything that they were doing. And they would dress up in various costumes. They were. Izzy wrote a book afterwards that was a book about being a prohibition agent and telling all the tales of all the different things he did and how he would disguise and how he would do stuff. Portchester smuggling. The syndicate is said to own a fleet of speedboats, each capable of landing 800 cases of liquor every trip. And they're out there, they pick it up out there in past the line and then zoom in on their ultra rapid speedboat. Now, 60 Halstead Avenue. Patrick Burns of 60 Halstead Avenue, Mamaroneck, was held at $500 bail by the United States Commissioner on a charge of possessing large quantities of liquor. James Mastro of the same address, accused of selling the liquor, was held at a bail of $1,000. The raid was made by agents that they found the door of the raided premises locked, but on knocking were admitted by Burns. Inside, they pleaded thirst and requested a drink. According to the police, the inmates of the place furnished the agents liquor and were at once put under arrest. With the assistance of Lieutenant Jerome Powell, the arrested men were brought to the Mamaroneck police station where they were held on a bail of $1,000 and so forth. Now we have this is a cartoon in the Mamaroneck paper. This is a snap of Senator Fat, who helps make the laws and talks through his hat. This is a flash of Congressman Wise, who drinks with the wet and votes with the dries. This is a thumbnail of Dry Agent McQueasy, who never is found near a speakeasy. While this is a tin type of Tony the Rat, thug gunman, and heaven knows what, he laughs at the laws and sells the booze and makes all the gang shake in the shoes. This is an etching of Big Boss O'Flip, who came to this land in a huge ship. He's a king of his precinct and lord of his board and collects from the gangsters to help pay his board. And this is a drawing of Police Captain Gazink, who was known to take a strong drink. A model of virtue, he ne'er takes a nip and gets his orders from Big Boss O'Flip. And this is a map of Citizen Gold, who is too blamed lazy to get out and vote. Finale. So Tony the Rat and Big Boss O'Flip and many another pickpocket and dip laugh at the laws and call it a day because Citizen Goat is always willing to pay. The Mamaroneck paper was very strongly in favor of prohibition. They were constantly doing editorials in favor of prohibition. June 28th, there was a kind of a burst of enforcement. So Sansones, 232 Mamaroneck Road, Sardones, 18 Spencer Place, Nick's Smoke Shop, 381 Mamaroneck Avenue, and Meridiano's, Waverly Avenue, were padlocked for 6 to 12 months. So these are places that were engaged in bootlegging. Here's a picture of the booze coming out of Sandstones, 232 Mamaroneck Avenue. It says the residents of Mamaroneck were given a treat yesterday when 20 federal prohibition agents raided many alleged speakeasies. In the above picture, many thirsty people are watching the removal of 14 barrels of liquor from the basement of 232 Mamaroneck Avenue. Now, this is another, a Larchmont event. I'll move us along with it. Now, this is a newspaper headline. 53, I said 53 speakeasies found in the village. Conditions in certain quarters found to be vile. Now, this is the local paper was very into this. Boy, 15, bartender in one place. All varieties of liquor may be bought, 25 saloons before Prohibition. In other words, where there were 25 saloons before Prohibition, there are 53 now. That Mamaroneck, like thousands of other communities in the country, is faced with the speakeasy menace, is unearthed today in a survey made by the Daily Times. 53 of these vile places having been found to exist in this village. This number does not include the unincorporated section of Mamaroneck, so this is just the village. Conditions in some of these resorts are so appalling that the ordinary peace-abiding resident of the village would probably not believe them without having actually witnessed them himself in his disposal. The outstanding instance is the case of a 15-year-old boy who was found tending bar in one well-known speakeasy, serving dozens of men, including many Negroes, who ranged about the bar at one time. Mamaroneck, the survey made by this paper shows, is wide open so far as liquor is concerned, and the thirsty have not far to reach to search before his hunt is rewarded. If his throat becomes parched on the Boston Post Road, there are at least 13 places along that highway in which he can successfully quench his thirst. Of these, 7 are located on the West Post Road and 6 on the East Post Road. Or should it be that he is overtaken with thirst on Mamaroneck Avenue, he can saunter along there and have the option of 13 more places and choose some. But a related headline gets a comment from the mayor on this dire situation. He says he's not well acquainted with speakeasy conditions. I don't know, I haven't seen it, I walk down the street, I don't see it at all. Now, here we have the 1930 appeal. Now, I don't know which of these districts are which places in the town, but they pretty much are all the same story. These are the town-wide votes to repeal Prohibition. And so there was a strong vote to do it. And it's interesting, if you think back to Billy Sunday's speech, his sermon about how Prohibition was going to reform men and make wives happy and children productive and make businesses productive and so on. So that was the premise on which this social movement was sold as a way to improve our society. Well, in this vote, the premise for voting for this was that they would, if you legalized the booze, you could tax it, and we would then be able to eliminate the federal income tax. And that was the promise, that you vote in this and we'll shall I dare say tariff the booze and we'll tax the booze, And that will make it possible for us to eliminate the federal income tax. Well, with the war, it never became possible to eliminate the federal income tax. That never quite worked out. But they did, now you then start to see in 33 permits being issued for clubs and stuff to go back. They're able to have liquor in the clubs, you know, it's returning to normal. But there's you know, they really do want to enforce the taxes because that was part of the whole idea. And over in Larchmont, Rudolph Schaefer, resident of Prior Manor and president of the F&M Schaefer Brewing Company of Brooklyn, one of the oldest brewers of lager beer in America, announced that his company would spend $750,000 and hire 400 men immediately on enactment of a new law permitting the manufacture and sale of beer. And so Mr. Schaefer in Larchmont reopens his beer industry. And that's the end.
Any questions?
How about some refreshments?
Wait, let's go downstairs and.
Well, I would like to look, you know, it was interesting that I couldn't get the paper to list the 53 places. You would think that in the inside of the paper, they would list the 53 places. But the paper was sort of reluctant to publish the places, the identities of the places for two reasons. One was a sense that you were sort of convicting and punishing before there'd been a trial. Maybe some of these, you know, weren't what they were alleged. But the other was that they didn't want to promote, you know, tell the public in the newspapers where you can get all this stuff. And so, but it seems to me that if we looked into the records of the town and village court for that time, we probably would see the cases. I mean, I've thought that it would be fun to have the Historical Society, and perhaps the firefighters might help in this, offer a speakeasy little badge that, you know, you could put on your building or your home. If we could certify that it's like it was a real speakeasy. And
Speakeasy.
yeah, yes.
Where was this liquor in such volume produced?
It was produced in other countries.
Canada.
Yeah, pretty much in Canada, yeah, but it was produced in Europe too. It was produced in many places. I mean, to
It
get,
came through our ports and everything.
yeah, it would come through Canada a lot on the trains. And you would have, you know, they show these studies of the inventories of the trains, and it would start with some numbers of trains worth of liquor. And then as it progressed down, nothing would be sold or offloaded, but the train would get shorter and shorter and shorter. Yes.
They have the car.
I found your presentation very interesting. I'm kind of new to the area, about 10, 11 years in Mamaroneck. But I've always been interested in local history and as local as I can get. So I start at my own house, find out as much as I can about my house and my neighborhood and the village and moving on. And as a former school teacher, I've always felt like the state standards should really more focus on local history first. So that you kind of understand that. And then you can understand, you know, further out, European history, world history, and everything else. But with that being said, one of the things was the link with the port, where you can get in close to your shell in that area. And then maybe stop a couple of places along the way, on your way to New York City. Now, my house was built, in an area called Shore Acres. And, the developer there was named, Harmon. Also related to Croton Harmon, there's a
Mhm.
school and a rail, train station named after him. So the house was started building in 1914, so looking at your timeline, 1917.
Mhm.
I started to back up, it's right on Otter Creek, I might mention too, which is similar to that map you were showing.
Mhm.
You can get in from Long Island Sound that way. Let's say if you were bringing booze in towards, the Washington Hotel, let's just say, which is the Duck Inn. So it's hotels at that time, I guess, but. The history, research I did, my house was built. For a man named Walter Stevens. So with that location, the guy named Walter Stevens and the Duck Inn, I went to the guy at the Duck Inn and I said, I saw on an old map that the Duck Inn, or Washington Hotel was proprietor on this map is W. Stevens. My house was owned by Walter Stevens. Could they have tried to get it in and they couldn't get there, so somebody flashed a lantern a couple of times and said, "That's not a good time," and go down Otter Creek and he gets to his house. And then he brings it to his hotel.
Mhm.
He says, "Come on with me, I gotta show you something." We go downstairs at the Duck Inn, Old Washington Hotel. There's a big old tunnel. He tells me that once upon a time, across the Boston Post Road from here, it was all filled in. It had been all filled in with landfill to make the Harbor Island Park. But at one time, you could get in by water right up to the Boston Post Road. And his tunnel goes right to that, the same direction of the Boston Post Road. So I'm trying to see if I think there might be a link between Walter Stevens, the owner of the house, and
Yeah,
W. Stevens, the proprietor.
yeah,
And I don't know if there's any way to find out what that W stands for.
yeah. Hard to know.
It's,
Yeah.
Just to follow up on what he was just saying, John Prince knows that the proprietor, the current proprietor of the Duck Inn is Paul Collins, who's a descendant of one of the IRA founders. He took me downstairs one day when there was nobody else in the place to look at the same big circular bricked up place where the stuff obviously came in on rails. And I was always I promised to buy John a beer because John, the proprietor said that was Al Capone.
Al Capone.
Al Capone's,
Yeah, that's the part I objected.
And so I was
There's
wondering.
no way Al Capone had anything to do with liquor in New York. No way.
You've gone to speak with him.
I haven't spoken with him yet.
Oh, you haven't? Oh, I thought you.
I spoke with him, but not specifically about that subject.
We'll have to have a congregation. Just find out the truth.
Well, I
But,
think
to
that,
your point, I was working at the library this past week and found a whole bunch of photographs across the street from the Duck Inn, where the water treatment plant was all buildings. So if there was a tunnel, it didn't go anywhere except into a basement of a building across the street, which would make sense, right, for what you're saying and suggesting, because it'd be easier to hide it in a building than anything else. As a matter of fact, Brit's store was on the corner of the Post Road and the entrance to the Harbor Island, which, by the way, is Hunter Drive. Right? The mayor you were talking about, Mayor Hunter, is named after him. But Brit's was one of the original locations for the Mamaroneck Library. before the building was built.
It's also important to remember that people were allowed to have large collections of liquor in their
Right.
homes. And so people will see something in their basement that looks like it was to store liquor. Or they'll see pictures of it or whatever, and imagine that they were a speakeasy. Well, they didn't have to be a speakeasy to have a liquor collection. That was just something that people did.
200 gallons.
Well, that would be to brew it, but I mean, but there was a tremendous amount of liquor that was sold before the law went in effect, because people were storing it.
You know, the Hanukkah story we're telling where the 20 people got away
Mhm.
was on private property. So it was really legal.
Yeah.
To have the liquor there,
Mhm.
right? And when the driver drove away, he's no longer on private property. Boom, he got sniped. So what?
Well, yes, but it's not legal to steal property from someone. From
No, I'm not talking
their
about the
property.
steal.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the,
I thought it was very puzzling why they would say that they couldn't. I mean, they certainly couldn't maybe charge them with, well, I don't know. I mean, I couldn't understand that article, why they felt they couldn't charge them. But they didn't.
Who knows?
Maybe the judge got a case.
They did. Yes,
One of the ironies of prohibition in any country is, as your presentation suggested, people produce much more, drink more. It's usually much lower quality. In poor countries like India, you got all these laborers who regularly drink methanol, go blind or die. And so, as H.L. Mencken of the Baltimore Sun said a century ago, the prohibition law in this country was the stupidest law ever passed by a great country.
Mhm.
I'm from Michigan, and I was delighted by your map, which showed Michigan as one of the main recalcitrants.
Mhm.
Michigan, I heard, was the first state to bring in prohibition and the first state to end it. But here's to Michigan.
Yeah,
The other thing I was gonna say is in the Pritz family history, we have a bunch of moonshiners in the mountains in Pennsylvania,
Hmm.
Near Pittsburgh. That happened back then. All right, so there was a whole bunch of people all over the country that were making their own.
Mhm.
I think in the flats, and in quite a few houses where people were producing large quantities of wine now.
Right, right.
Well, they just as a. Yeah, in 1917. USA consumed 70 million gallons of wine. By 1925, USA consumed 150 million gallons of homebrewed wine.
Yeah. And spirits.
Yeah, I mean, so that
Who's reporting it?
no.
That's great.
Well, thank you very much.
For President back.
Well,
Nice.